So let's take a look at an example. Let's just take a very simple one. Trying to get parents to read more with their kids at home, right? So it seems, our initial reaction would probably be like, let's do some sort of campaign or whatever, and then they will know, and the end. Of course, it's not that simple. So even if you look at something like at home reading, you'll see that there are several actors that could influence a parent's ability, decision to read at home. So, these are potential actors. So if Dewi is the child with whom, we want Reza, her dad, to read more, there are several people that we could work with to potentially improve Reza's ability to read more at home with Dewi. So we can map these actors back into the socio-ecological model. So, Reza's, in this instance, the individual whose behavior we want to change. Noor is I think that was her name, his sister. So she represents the family level. The teacher, Basia, represents this community and institutional societal level. And then Budi is our policymaker that could also have an influence in in the end goal of Reza reading more with Dewi. So if we then do our research and focus on researching the one behavior, so that he should be reading a story with Devi every day to promote her literacy skills, this, you could then uncover that there are several factors that could influence his decision. So from your interviews with him and focus groups with several dads, you could find that maybe time, work schedule, the books not being in local language, his role in the household / gender norms, his own reading ability, and the price of books could all be factors and reasons why he's not doing this behavior. And so we would then map these barriers back to the socio-ecological model, if you will. So we would see things like time and work schedule and reading ability are all factors at the individual level that we would want to change. And then, things like books not being available in the local language, books being more expensive would represent things that we might need to change at the systems and policy level. And then, things that like the gender norms, and by that I mean, for example, how people might perceive what the role is of a dad. So a dad is not, yeah, exactly, Natalia. So a dad is not supposed to be doing these feminine things or whatever. So this is something we might want to work at the community level on. Excuse me. So SBC is then really about designing interventions that would remove these barriers, right? So just if you look at the color coding, so a solution that we might find for the time barrier that he's experiencing is that we would help him to organize his day better to fit reading into his schedule. Yeah. We might also help the family design a reading schedule. We might, have him tell stories instead of feeling the pressure to read a book. And then we might also want to work with private sector providers to look at providing more books in the local language. And we might also want to work with government. So there's lots of different things we could do to facilitate a behavior that might seem very simple, but it really just depends on what the barrier is. And so as you can see also from an organizational point of view, you might then see that it's with your resources, your team skills, your budget, there would be certain things that you would be able to, certain areas where you'd be able to intervene and others where you will not. So some organizations would just have the capacity and the resources to basically look at things at the individual level, right? So they might just decide to work with dads and groups of dads. And some organizations are more focused on systemic issues. And so they might be working more with policymakers and with government on removing some of the structural barriers. They may also want to work more with teachers or schools to facilitate some of the behaviors around reading, at home reading. So I think it's really important just to remember that we can use SBC to change behavior at the individual, community, societal, and systems levels. So I'll just take you very quickly through some examples at each of these levels. So one is Coach and Pilo by PSI. I really love this project. So this is it's Coach and Pilo is like this fictional aspirational character that supports the project, actually kind of creates coaches, so other men who are HIV positive, and they support men with personalized coaching, emotional support, and guidance. And so these peer coaches are very powerful because they understand the challenges themselves firsthand, because they're also HIV positive, and they also understand the stigma around being HIV positive. And so they're the way that they measure the impact of Coach and Pilo and the peer coaching methodology is adherence to HIV treatment, because that is the end result that they're looking for, that the men take their medication regularly. So I think they have lots of data online that you could look at. An example of a project that works at the community level is Buck Buck Gang by it's one of Girl Effect's brands, and it's a Facebook group that empowers young girls in India to discuss sensitive topics like reproductive health. And they create a safe space for conversation. They provide emotional support, and they also offer information. And they work with a number of health professionals as well. So beyond the community support, they also offer linkages to service providers. So that's a good example of like something that addresses barriers at a community level. At a societal level, so anything to do with like social norms, social influence, that sort of thing, usually large scale media is really effective, because people change when they see other people changing, essentially. So, and then large scale media often opens the door for having conversations with each other and debates about a certain topic. So that's why it tends to be quite effective. So an example is, for instance, the drama Is Lost High, which aired between 2013 and 2017. And it was the first ever all Latino cast, drama cast in Hollywood's production. And the show tackled key issues like adolescent sexual and reproductive health. And they actually managed to double traffic to stayteen.org, which is a Planned Parenthood program. And yeah, they basically just managed to get a lot of traction and discussion. It's also an Emmy nominated show, so it also had it was just a very glossy production. So, it was a good show. You'd enjoy watching it anyway. But it had this additional impact in that it had this connection with Planned Parenthood. And there's also a few papers written about it, and you could look at Population Media Center for more detail on that. And then at the systems level, you also see behavioral science applied in many different ways. One project is MMC Sustain, which is it's actually managed by Genesis Analytics in South Africa, the South African Department of Health. And one of the things that they tried, this project has lots of different layers, and this is just one example of the many layers within it. So this is about helping nurses report adverse events that result from voluntary medical male circumcision. So it's really important to keep track of these unwanted episodes, basically. And the intervention is not just a poster, I know it looks like that, but the poster is one of several layers within the intervention. So this kind of acts as a reminder. But obviously there's, sessions between the health care professionals themselves, the way that the management structure is set up. They also did a lot of work around that when meetings are had, changing the culture around reporting adverse events. So, that people don't see it as a failure, but that it's more of like a perk if you report something that could potentially improve the service. Great. So I talked a lot, and I'll just share some key highlights. So SBC is multidisciplinary. It's evidence-based and theory-driven. We have a very wide toolbox of things that we could do and use. And we don't only work at the individual level. I really want people to stop thinking that. And it can be applied to any field. So I hope that, with some of the examples, I think health tends to dominate just because it's the sector that's used behavioral science and SBC for the longest, but we're seeing that that's going to change, and it is changing over time. And yeah, so, I will be starting on a project that's looking at SBC within the space of social protection. So, you could use it literally for anything and everything. Okay, and with that, let's start our Q&A session.